So, welcome to the podcast, Gordon. It's great to have you on today. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Delighted to be here.
So, for those who haven't come across working with parents in sport before or yourself before, give us a bit of an understanding of your own kind of experience as a youngster in sport and how that's evolved into what you do today.
Yeah, I think when I look back and reflect on everything, I sort of can't remember a day when sport wasn't a sort of major part of my life or my existence. I think back to my childhood certainly as a starting point, and I remember being kept very busy. I think that was probably more to do with how badly behaved I was at school. If I'm really honest, but my parents, it's like most parents, it was your sort of, your Monday night Cubs, your Wednesday night swimming, your Saturday morning football, your Sunday morning rugby, your gymnastics. I think they provided those opportunities and took me to those things. And then those early memories of when obviously we didn't have as much sports as we have on the TV now, those early days of watching Liverpool, who became a great love on the TV. Back then, it was obviously their golden era in the sort of mid-80s. Those early memories of watching sport and then suddenly finding Test cricket, which was suddenly really exciting, and I'd never seen the game, and just wanting to go out and almost replicate, what I was seeing. Nobody necessarily pushed me towards that. I just thought it was something that was really cool and something that just sort of stayed with me, really. So I mean, that they're the sort of very early memories as a younger child. And then it developed from there, and I became a reasonable sportsman and sort of played county cricket as an under 15, and I was an England under 19 rugby trialist, and played in the same trial as the likes of Lewis Moody and Steve Thompson and Ben Cohen and people who won that World Cup. And you would play against them on a regular basis and compete well. So yeah, been a huge part of my life, really, and being fortunate that my professional life was able to continue that as well.
So, how long were you a dual sportsman for with cricket and rugby? Did you kind of specialize on one or did you keep
Uh,
it going all the way through?
Oh no, not at all. I mean, that was back to those days where you just did everything. I mean, there was no such thing as specialization, was there, back then? I mean, it really was sort of unheard of. It sort of shows how old I'm getting, really, doesn't it? But you played a bit of summer sport, but you played football and rugby in the winter, and if there's a game of tennis going on the side, you'd give that a go, and then you'd go and hit a few golf balls. There was never any thought that any of them were going to lead anything other than you were just playing them at that point in time.
Hmm. And then where did the interest in teaching come from and that kind of route? When did that pop up?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I did a degree in sports science, and obviously, again, it was an interest, the whole coaching side, I guess, and the sporting side. And I got injured in my early 20s, sort of playing rugby. Wasn't quite good enough to maybe achieve the levels that I'd maybe sort of set myself out to. And I guess probably like a lot of people, then, rather than staying in the game and taking some enjoyment from maybe being a level 4, level 5, level 6 rugby player, I sort of down tools on it, really, and went over to New Zealand to work in a school. And that's when I really got into coaching, and I was very fortunate in that year to be given the opportunity to coach different teams, very similar setup to the school I'd been at. So I understood what was required, and I started to find my feet coaching, and again, just watching what other people were doing. It's become a lot of watching and reflecting and trying things and adapting. And back then, Eddie Jones was the king of the ACT Brumbies, and I remember back in Super Rugby, they were playing some wonderfully creative stuff at that time with George Gregan and Larkham and a lot of the Australian players, and it was just really inspiring. So it was like, well, if it's good enough for the ACT Brumbies, I can incorporate it. Now, it's not as easy as that in coaching, but you've got to start somewhere. And I still vividly remember those bits. And then when I came back, I got straight into my coaching awards and got qualified very quickly, and was fortunate enough to get straight into some decent coaching jobs.
And then how did that kind of transpire into becoming a director of sport? What did that part of your career look like?
Yeah, so I was sort of coaching men's sport at 2024 as a sort of level 3 rugby coach at that stage, but at the same time was fortunate enough to be working at Sedbergh School, a top school for coaching rugby, and I coached the forwards for 5 years. And because of the nature of my contract, it allowed me to do both roles. So in effect, I was doing a ridiculous number of coaching sessions every week, because I was doing sort of 5 in school and then two with the club. And just the sheer volume I got through in those 5 years, certainly, and what you learned certainly set you up for everything that followed. And then I guess I had to grow up a little bit and try and get a better job that was maybe more suitably paid for probably what I'd learned and picked up during that period. So it sort of evolved out of that into ending up running, I guess, coaching programs or being a director of sport.
So looking back on that kind of development of the different various experiences that you had, are there any things that pop out as being kind of key catalysts, any people or experiences that kind of remain influential today?
Yeah, I think I liked a lot of the Southern Hemisphere stuff at the time. As I say, I think the stuff Eddie Jones was doing, and I was thrilled when he sort of came over here, having watched a lot of his work from those days. But also, when you live in a country like New Zealand and you see what sport means to people, and you actually see that the values and cultures that all of their people create around, particularly the rugby experience, I think there's a lot of messages that come from that if you stuck pretty close to those, you'd be all right. So they're probably the biggest, I guess. And then influences in this country, I was very, I remember back then doing sort of coaching rugby courses in the summer just to add to the hundreds of sessions that I was already doing. But you're working with 4 or 5 coach people like John Fletcher, who obviously now is part of the Magic Academy, but John was coaching at Newcastle Falcons at the time, and Jeff Wappett, who was coaching Rotherham in the Premiership at that stage. Who else was around in that era? And they were always on hand to offer support or an opportunity to watch. And you just spending time with lots of different coaches and hearing their points of views and adapting them to your own ideas and what you thought was just invaluable. And I don't think anybody should ever underestimate just getting out there, trying things, doing it, but then having those people you can have those conversations with, or people that you massively respect.
So kind of digging a little bit deeper now, what would you say is the real thing that drives you? What's your why for remaining involved in sport and wanting to make a positive impact?
I think it's just had such a positive impact on my life. And I see society today, and particularly with the challenges of screen time, and I just see sport as this amazing opportunity, and still one of the safest vehicles for children to develop so many different skills that will allow them to thrive in whatever walk of life that they do. And I think that element of coaching has become a real driver for me, whereas probably when I started, it was very technical, tactical, make sure I got those bits right, make sure the actual, I guess, performance element was there. But actually, how I build that experience around it as well, and the value that carries has become something that's sort of taken over a little bit, I guess.
So talk to us a bit about working with parents in sport. Where did the idea for that come from? What was the kind of catalyst? What happened there?
So the catalyst for working with parents in sport is one of the most bizarre stories ever, I guess. So I was sat in a local village hall watching my son play football. He was 3, and I wasn't overly interested in what he was doing. As I said to you, I was doing so much coaching in a week that it was like a busman's holiday. It was like, oh god, even more sport, even more sessions, but this time with 3-year-olds. And of course, because I never coached 3-year-olds or even attempted to do anything with a 3-year-old, I really was struggling for interest, other than the fact that I knew I was doing a good job in getting my son moving. And I suddenly then was given a card by a football scout who handed me a card and said, I think your son's really good. All right. Okay, that's great. I'm glad you think that. So, of course, you then get the reaction as a parent, don't you? I sort of went out and thought, this is really cool. a top football club that's won the European Cup before I've just been handed a card. My son must be amazing, mustn't they? I need to ring people and tell them, because this is it. And then I've got one half of me saying, Gordon, you've been in sport all these years. He's three. But on the other side, I had these contrasting emotions about, oh, isn't this just amazing? As a parent, isn't this just the best thing ever? And that sort of sporting journey, the early stages of the sort of follow on from that. I mean, he's still in a football academy now and he's 12, so that's a miracle in itself. But the early experiences of managing that and looking for relevant information or looking for support, even though I knew a lot of it from a coaching and science background, I just didn't feel that there was anything there for parents. And I listened to all the conversations that were going on around the sporting experience, which you would never normally see as a coach, because you're always right in the middle doing the coaching. So you're never actually aware of what's going on around you. And some of the thoughts and the points of view, although massively well-intentioned, when you actually took that against the science and how sport pans out, just could not have been more wrong. And it wasn't a criticism of the people that were coming out with them, but I just realized that we just hadn't done enough to bring parents on as part of the journey to understand, you know, what the sporting experience is about and some of the things that they're going to encounter and some of the things that will maybe help them do that. So it became, I guess, a real labor of love. There was nothing out there like it in terms of, you could find parental information, but it was scattered over everybody's sites in different corners of the, globe, trying to pull it all into one place. And I still massively believe, for me, in the way we've set up working with parents in sport, very normal, that being a big Liverpool fan as well, that whenever we do content for it, everybody in the middle of Merseyside had to be able to understand it. And anything we've ever produced, although underpinned by science and experience, it had to be understood by people and could be used by people. Not that everybody agreed with everything that working with parents in sport said or everything that Gordon MacLelland said, but at least they could reflect on it and it could maybe open up further conversations. And that's been a big driver for our content. And if you look at the pricing on the site and what we've done as well, this isn't about us producing £100 courses and whatever else. It's very much set up that if you can afford a pie and a pint, you can engage with working with parents in sport. And it was no more complicated than that.
So would you sum that up as being kind of the overall aim and objective, like making information accessible and applicable to the kind of every man parent, if you like?
Yeah, and to engage as many parents in it as possible, so that ultimately they can help support their children to get the absolute very most out of the sporting experience. But you see, once you start digging deeper into this and you actually look at, let's say, the coaching role, or let's say if you're a teacher, you then start to realize that nobody's ever talked to us about how we engage with parents. Nobody's ever actually trained a coach on what we're trying to do with parents. So you end up with this where everybody's got very different experiences of parents. Some have got some positive stories, lots have got many negative stories. And when you talk to lots of teachers and coaches, we've all had our challenges with parents over the years. And then you start to think, oh, hang on a minute, we're missing a trick here, because there's a whole coach education piece here. And then you start to realize, actually, it's not just about the coach, because then if the culture isn't right from the organization or the club or the sporting institution, well, that's not going to work either, because all three of them can't be separate entities. So it then became this big driver to like, well, hang on a minute, we've got an organizational piece to do here. The coaches are gatekeepers of that culture on their parental engagement. And only then can we start to engage parents with consistent messages, and they have confidence in what we're actually delivering and what we're doing with their children. So it opened up, another couple of avenues around that piece, which we've spent a lot of time. It was obviously easier on that bit from a coaching point of view, just because I understood club sport, I understood school sport, I understood some of the pressures that went with it and some of the communications and expectations of parents, that I found that easier to talk about, engage with, work with. But, you know, as everybody would, you've got areas that you're more comfy with because that's what you've spent most of your life doing. That's very much where we are. So it's very much all the parents that can get engaged, coaches so that they understand the parental role, and then clubs ultimately, because if we engage parents well, and they feel that it's a valued part of their child's journey, and in terms of what we're selling, well, we're going to have more kids playing sport, which goes back to the original aim of why we set it up in the first place, was that people got the most out of that experience, and the more that can get that, the better.
So what are some of the methods you use to engage coaches and parents? Like, obviously, I know you've got your podcast and a few resources on the website. What does it look like in terms of the operation of working with parents in sport?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the thing started off as the platform, and then the ability, I guess, to deliver fun and engaging workshops. You know, either on a face-to-face thing, or certainly over the last couple of years in the virtual world. And you know, having some of these conversations that people had often talked about, you know, behind closed doors, but actually bringing them out into the open and allowing people to acknowledge the challenges that each of the roles have. You know, what's actually going on with this sporting journey and the realities of it all, and actually just being really honest and allowing people to feel comfortable, I guess, with engaging with it and talking about it. And we make a real effort in workshops to give everybody a voice, parents a voice, everybody to feel valued, nobody to feel judged, nobody to be told off, because the reality of this piece is we will still get it wrong. I still get it wrong as a parent, even though I sort of live and breathe this work, and that's something I think we've got to be aware of. But I just hope we made it a bit cooler. I just hope we've made it something that people are happy to talk about and engage with, and it isn't so much of a taboo subject that it once was.
I think it's a really important area because, I mean, you'll know yourself, as you said in your own experience, but you definitely come across parents, particularly if someone's quite, you know, their child's quite adept at multiple sports, and then everyone wants their pound of flesh, you know, whether they're a good basketballer and a good volleyballer, and the regional team wants them and an academy team wants them, and it gets difficult to manage all those different stakeholders. So what are some of your recommendations for the parents of young athletes who might find themselves in some of those tricky spots?
I think it's really important that you inform yourself of the science of child development, how children learn, you know, what the sort of research tells us around maybe specializing too early, for example, and only concentrating and focusing on one sport. You know, there's data out there now that tells us that actually those that did multi-sports at a younger age can often overtake their early specializing peers, but much later on. Because, you know, that makes sense as well, doesn't it? If you just do one thing and that's all you do, you would expect at the age of 10 to be pretty good at it, compared to the person who's spread his time over 6 different things. And then we think, oh, well, they're always going to be better than them. But we know that that isn't the case either. So I think you've got to inform yourself. I think you've got to trust from reliable sources what the sort of science tells us. And I think ultimately you've got to decide what you're comfortable with. Having sort of tried to inform yourself and thought about what's going on and come up with that information, you know, what is going to work for you and your family, what is going to be manageable, what really sits comfortably with you, and then commit to it. You know, I say this all the time, you're going to just commit to it then. It's a bit like choosing a school, isn't it? You always have this doubt whether it's the right thing or not. But if you go with it, go with it. You're probably going to be all right, whatever route you choose to go. But, you know, really commit to that and stay true to what you believe is the right thing to do. I mean, I still joke now that, honestly, in my early days watching my son play football, we used to get to May, and I used to walk off the field and say to people, oh, I'll see you in August. And this is when people were chasing the 9-year-old football contract. And honestly, I may have looked as though I'd come from Mars. Now, yes, it was a tough choice because you've got that feeling of, am I going to regret this? Am I stitching up my own child? Is this actually right when everybody else is going to be doing it? Are they going to be getting left behind? And then on the other side, it's like, Gordon, you know, it doesn't make sense to play sport for 12 months a year round. You know, it's totally right now to go and play cricket, tennis, golf, everything else that's going on, and enjoy it and come back in August. And you'll probably find they're probably further on than the people who have done it, or certainly later in the season, who are then tired, or maybe get to those teenage years where they're then completely bored and burnt out and have no interest in taking on the coach, particularly when it starts getting more challenging and it gets tougher. And trusting that. So you have to back yourself, you know, you have to back yourself. But again, that's based on being informed, isn't it? You know, if I didn't know all that stuff, how can I make an informed judgment about what's best for my family and my children?
No, that's you're bang on there, because it's easy to get swept up in the collective kind of mania, isn't it? Of oh well, everyone else is sending their kid to here to get extra coaching, so I'm going to do that. Or you know, everyone's doing that extra session a week that we were going to take him swimming, but actually we'll stop that now, because you don't want to feel, like you said, like you're missing out.
Yeah, it is. It's hard, and it remains hard. Yeah, it's a real challenge, without a doubt.
So what about those parents who have that, you know, have stepped into the breach and are you know, those dual roles of both a coach and a parent? What sort of things would you help in terms of that? Because there's obviously two very different roles there that can get pretty tricky sometimes.
Yeah, I think you've got to have very clear boundaries, haven't you? And I think, you know, the title of our new book, the two hats, I think, you know, couldn't sum it up any better. You have certainly got to know when you're the parent and when you're the coach, and there has to be very clear boundaries about when the coach hat goes on and when the parent hat goes on. I think you've got to paint a really good picture to your child about what it's going to look like. I mean, I think before anybody even takes on the role, I think, you know, we've got to have a conversation with our child about what this may actually look like for them, or get their feelings. Just likewise, I think we need to have a conversation with other members of the family, you know, because the reality of taking on that role is that, you know, you're suddenly going to go into this coaching world and you're going to have to spend more time on your phone organizing logistics, and you're going to have people bothering you at times that you didn't have, and you're going to be slightly more preoccupied than you maybe have been. And you may have you may have another child who plays another sport, and it might mean that you're going to spend less time with them because you've committed to more time with the other. So I think all these things, I think you've got to be aware of. And I think you've got to paint the picture for our children that, you know, that's when mum or dad is coach, and that's when mum or dad is a parent. And actually, I need you when I'm the coach I've got to treat you like everybody else. I've got to try and be as objective as everybody else. Sometimes I may have to be honest with you and give you feedback that you don't like to hear, just like I may have to with other players. And you're going to have to understand. And that immediately causes conflict for us as a parent, because that doesn't always sit comfortably, certainly out in public, you know, particularly if it's slightly critical as well, which then leads on to that next point, that we then we get into the role to help our kid and make it even more amazing for them, and be up close with our role modeling, feel really involved in their sporting experience. And then we're overly harsh on them because we don't want people to think that there's any favoritism going on. So the one thing that we set out to do, we actually are conflicted with straight away. So you talk to lots of parent coaches and they find that, and you normally get them at both ends of the spectrum. You get the one who over favors their own child and then rubs everybody else up the wrong way, the other players and the parents. Or you get the ones who are overly critical because they worry about how that's perceived. And then the poor child who was meant to be at the heart of the experience that we're trying to help suddenly gets a raw deal on everything. So I think, again, it's bringing out those dialogues that it's all about awareness, isn't it? You know, it's all about awareness and having these conversations and seeing what it may look like, and speaking to other people who've maybe done it before and learning from them. And again, it's going to be different for different people in their context. You know, do what works for you in your home environment and where you are and the cultures that you find yourself in, and do what suits you. But at least, again, have an understanding of what's at play, and certainly don't let it overtake everything. I think, you know, when the sport just becomes every topic of conversation, particularly if it isn't going particularly well and it gets brought up all the time, I think there's got to be a very clear separation of what home is. You know, Len Bush, who was on our podcast, who coaches the Great Britain under-20s women's basketball team, but coaches Sevenoaks Suns in the Women's Basketball League. Len coached all his daughters and still does now, and she's obviously a sort of pro athlete now, playing for them. And he said, they used to have some monumental fallouts at training, and she wasn't happy with him in any way whatsoever. And he used to have to get home, because he said he was quite strong-willed as well, and he used to have to go through the front door, and he used to then have to come and be dad, and he used to say, do you want to tell me what that stupid coach has done today? And he then suddenly had to be the parent, and of course his daughter would come out with all of it. But at least he'd separated the roles and realised that he would have to take it on the chin. And it was brilliant the way he told it. But you've got to have that. There's definitely got to be that separation where our children realise that ultimately we're still their parent, and that means that they can tell us what they want and give us it with both barrels if that's how they're feeling.
It's almost like carefully curated multiple personalities, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just funny the way he told it. He tells it better than me.
So what about those coaches who are, contemplating crossing the divide to the parents? What are some of the issues that pop up when coaches are dealing with, fellow adults, but who are obviously all, as you say, trying to create that positive sport experience for all of their individual children? It's just there's 20 odd of them. How can coaches go about managing that?
Yeah, look, I think we find a lot of coaches have got a negative perception of parents before you even start. And I think that there's got to be a shift in how we see them. I mean, let's be clear here. While I'm sort of preaching to coaches that I've got all the answers, I certainly haven't. And certainly in my early coaching days, it was like, no, I'll see you later. I'll do the coaching, thanks. I don't want you anywhere near it. This is my domain, and I'm happy to talk about other stuff. And actually, as you get older, maybe get a bit more comfortable in your skin and become a little bit more aware of what's going on around the experience of the play, you start to realize that probably isn't the greatest approach. I think the stories we've seen coming out of US gymnastics, things like that I don't think over the next 20 years, we can have a culture where coaches and athletes go one way and parents go another. I just don't think that's going to exist. But then I get the coach fear that the parents then interfere at a time that the coaches don't want as well from a coach perspective. And I think it's having those dialogues that again paint the picture of how it's going to look for us all, where we are all working in the best interest of the children, but we recognise those boundaries that we all want, around the sporting experience. I think there's got to be a shift in how we perceive them. If parents have the biggest influence on their kids and know more about their kids' behaviours than anybody else, generally as a rule, then surely we should be savvy as coaches, because we can get information from that. We can see what's going on. We can learn how we can work with that individual more. And with the fact that they are the most influential, it's no good us doing all this amazing coaching and valuing all these things or these life skills and character skills if the moment they get in the car with mum or dad say completely the opposite. All that hard work's gone. You take 2 steps forward, you take 2 steps back. So I think that alignment of what we're all trying to do, working together, the communication around that piece, the behaviors, that if that's what we're saying we're going to do, that's what parents see, so it's consistent, is really, really important. And for young coaches and inexperienced coaches, it gets far easier with experience, but we have got lots of coaches out there who inexperienced, maybe haven't been parents, haven't really spent that amount of time having to talk to older adults. You get some pretty big grizzly warriors stood there on the side of sports. It must be terrifying for a 21-year-old to go and approach them about a conversation about their child. We've got to, that's where, to be fair to a lot of the NGBs we work with, that's where we've got to recognise that it's a really important part of coach ed. There's no point doing 3 hours on nutrition for a coaching award if we haven't done an hour on how we engage with the 10 people stood there every week, twice a week, watching training and at matches. That doesn't make any sense at all. We're lucky enough to go into the Odd University and talk to coaching students about what they're going to face. And it's just great, because at least you've sort of forewarned them rather than them get there and stand there and realise that there's this whole dynamic that they probably hadn't even thought about that stood there, expecting, I don't know, not expecting a return, but certainly expecting something from it.
Do you think a lot of those conflicts come out of maybe a lack of clarity between the coach and the parent on what is their role? Because as you say, a lot of, historically it might be, parents drop the kid off and that's, away from the car, and that's maybe all the coach sees. So there's, maybe just that question mark over, well, what is my role as a parent in this experience? And also from the coaching perspective of, well, what is the parental role? And actually, because there's not a clear, look, here's what, expectations of me as a coach, this is the way I'm going to choose my team, or this is the way, I'm expecting your child to behave. And then the flip side of that, as a parent, what are you expecting from me as a coach, kind of thing? Do you think because those aren't laid out, that leads to conflict?
Yeah, and I think also that, if we haven't provided that information either as sporting organisations or as coaches, we are asking parents, many of whom will have no background in sport other than what they see on the TV or what their own experience of sport was, is that they end up joining their own dot. Because how else are they meant to know? I can't go out now and tell somebody how to lay bricks. I wouldn't have a clue where to start. And nor would I expect to. So if I was suddenly being asked to do that and take on that role, and I've got no background, I really hope somebody would give me some idea of why we do something the way we do it. Otherwise, it's challenging. Yet we seem to have got to a stage where it's not commonplace, but there's a lot of it that goes on. But that mixed message piece is a fascinating one, whereby we say as a club or an organization that we're about developing individuals and we're about development and we're not focused on results. And yet you go on the social media feed and all anybody talks about are the results. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because then I look at it and then as a parent, I'm thinking, oh, they must really value that because that's all that ever gets any praise. Oh, well, I'd better value that, because that's clearly what's important. So I think that message from what the clubs give, and then the coaches, as I said earlier, the gatekeepers of that culture to what we give the parents, is really important. And the more we can back that up with behaviours and reinforce those messages, the more likely we are that everybody's going to be on the same page and working together on it.
I guess there's also the dangers of, unless you are very explicit in what you set out as your expectations, people revert to kind of default expectations, don't they? So a parent might assume, well, we're obviously trying to win the league, and that obviously means we're going to pick the best team every week. So if little Johnny's the second choice scrum half, well, he's going to sit on the bench until the first choice scrum half is injured. And whereas that player's parent might have completely different experience of, we're all about development, so everyone should get equal playing time. And unless you have explicit expectations, people do just go back to default expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course they do. That's human nature, isn't it? But it takes really strong leadership to do that, doesn't it? And this isn't about in any way about negating winning either. I say that at the start of my parents' workshops. Let's get one thing clear: I'm one of the most competitive people in the world as a parent, as a coach, and everything else. I value winning and I value competition massively. It's not a taboo subject for me. I think the danger comes when we see it as the only part of the sporting experience and the only defining part of the sporting experience, that's when it becomes dangerous. But it's certainly got its place. But again, handled correctly and managed correctly, it's valuable in as part of any experience.
And as you say, it's easy for people to go to the social media and see that and just see all the win records or all the highlight reels, whereas actually a match that you lost 3-2 but was a really brilliant competitive encounter and brought the best out of everyone, well, that was just as valuable for development as when you were on the winning side of that 3-2.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about from the parental side of that parent-coach relationship? What, if there's parents tuning in who aren't coaching their children, but they are exactly where you were a few years ago on the sideline thinking, how do I join the dots? But without your experience and without your understanding of the sports science and child development, what would be some of the kind of thoughts from you in terms of building that positive relationship with the coach?
Yeah, I mean, you would hope that, if we can put it, for me, it's organisation and coach led to start with this, that if they understand what's going on, as you say, and it's been explicit, that they've actually got a starting point to sort of work from, which would certainly help them. I think one thing we've got to do as parents in terms of building relationships with coaches as well is just simple pleasantries and hellos and thank yous. But I think that's a two-way process as well, but can be so often, ignored. Amazing, isn't it? When we do some coach work, that one of the big gripes of parents, because one of their biggest stresses is the time, the money, the logistics, managing other kids, just everything that goes with it. Sometimes coaches have never even bothered to thank them for that. And if we took that on a human level away from sport, it probably doesn't look great. So, you know, two words with massive meanings there. But I think that's a two-way thing where parents are thanking the coaches for giving up their time and are acknowledging them and are saying hello and trying to be positive around the experience. I think we've got to focus on our own children. And I think any dialogue with coaches should be based around that. In terms of any conversations that we have, that we shouldn't be bringing other people into it or other parents into it. It should be very much focused on our own child, because there are concerns rather than a general concern. I think it's probably also good to ask questions, but then I would say that from a coaching perspective as well. You know, that's just general, I guess, what is it, conflict resolution, even though we're not having a conflict, is try and see it from the other person's point of view. So I think if we have got something that's bugging us, I think we need to ask why it looks like that and ask the coach, what does it look like? And can they explain it to us? And then obviously pick up the conversation from that point. But likewise, if we're a coach and the parent's really struggling with something, actually listen to them, say, I don't really get this, what thing, and actually taking the time to explain it. And I think we've got to get, you know, the way we go about it right, you know, the timing of these conversations and the methods that we use. You know, late night emails, late night texts are never great for anybody. I think we end up with really bad dialogue. I think if we send messages that are important, we do it through text, they can be severely misinterpreted by both parties rather than with something that's gone on face to face. But then likewise, you know, coaches have got to provide the opportunity where they are available for a conversation, you know, but then coaches fear that, hang on, I haven't got 5 hours to talk about little Johnny again for the third time this week, you know, and so there's all that to sort of wade through. But again, that still comes back down to, you know, really healthy boundaries. This is what it looks like. This is the communication policy. This is when we're available. This one might not be available. This is what we do if there's an issue, and what we're going to try and do so that it's a productive conversation. I think all these things, you know, managed well, are easy to implement as well. I don't think they're difficult to implement. I just don't think anybody's really dug that deep before, because we've got lots of other things to worry about. But actually, you know, you go through COVID now, I look at well-being, I look at humans and how they've been with each other. And I just think this is a really just important part of the jigsaw now. And I did originally, but I just think it's even more so now moving forward.
I mean, the kind of recurring things that I'm hearing, like thinking about all those different roles as a parent coach, as a coach with a parent, it seems that like boundaries and expectations are the two things that really seem to underpin a lot of those interactions.
Yeah, and really good communication, isn't it? A really effective communication. Yeah, absolutely. And ongoing, you know, not the yearly parents meeting where the coach stands up, tells them how it's going to be, shoves a code of conduct in the face, gets them to sign it, goes in the glove box till the same time next year. It's not policed by anybody 3 weeks later, so the whole thing's a complete waste of time. You mean that one is probably not the way to go about it. You know, it's got to be more than that and better thought out, and has got to be more ongoing. But we've all got a part to play. You know, everybody says, Gordon, whose side you're on? Well, I'm on everybody's side. Not on a side. I'm on everybody's side, because I think there's got to be certain shifts in coach behavior and attitude, and I also think there's got to be certain shifts in the parental approach to it as well. And I think if everybody can be prepared to do that in the best interests of the young people that we're working with, then I think we've got a chance.
What are your thoughts on, you know, as a parent navigating, you know, a kind of negative situation in terms of, you know, a player's not being selected or being deselected, or kind of maybe, you know, a culture of a team that you kind of maybe perceive as being toxic? Is there any kind of thoughts in terms of how to approach that? Because that can be a real minefield for parents, can't it?
Yeah, I think it's hugely challenging, and I still live and breathe that even now. Yeah, it winds you up, doesn't it? You sit at home, you worry about it, you mull it over, makes you angry, it's frustrated, it recurs in your mind whether it's the right thing. And I think that I've got to the stage with some of it where it's like, yeah, but he's only 11. You know, he's only 11. It's young sport. You know, it's different today, it's different tomorrow. It'll be different in a year's time. It'll be completely different in 3 years' time. Yes, it's the here and now and it feels important. Is it that important? Maybe, maybe not. I think you get better at handling it. I think if you are upset or you don't like, look, and I think this is the key again. We have got choices if we don't like cultures and environments to say that's not healthy. If we know our stuff, we can make that choice, can't we? If we're uncomfortable as a parent, think, actually, do you know what? I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with the development. We should be allowed to challenge, but challenge within the boundaries that have been set and say, look, I'm really not happy with this. This is what I was expecting to see. This is, it doesn't look like that to me. And I'm concerned for my own child. See what the responses are. See if we can work through some of those challenges. If we can't work through them, then I think, you know, it's every right for us to say, actually, you know what? I'm going to go and do this somewhere else or pick something else. I don't think there's any other way. But you know what? You're going to get loads of dips. You know, we talked to this in Paris. You're going to get loads of ups and downs. It's absolute nightmare. It's an absolute roller coaster. 1 minute it's going brilliantly. Next minute you hate it. Next minute it's great. Next it's not so good. Oh, it's a bit boring now. God, this is the same. Doing this all the time. Very, you know, everything plateaus out. I think you've got to get comfortable with the fact that that's the reality of parenting, whether we're sport parenting or not. And I think when you realise that, yeah, you do what works for you and get out the other side and know that there'll be another day.
So for those who are, you know, either sports parents or coaches who have that dual role, where would you point people towards to kind of, I don't know, get some more useful resources or input around this kind of topic and content?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, there's lots of, I mean, obviously, you know, we'll come on to our own stuff. I mean, our site, we would say from a parent coach point of view, coaches working with parents, we would hope that, you know, we've got the sort of #1 platform in the world on that. And if we haven't, that's what we'll be certainly striving to get to. But in terms of general coaching, you know, and I look at what coaches can afford, and some of the free resources, the I Coach Kids stuff, I think is good. I think some of the podcasts like the Science of Sport podcasts are a really good one. I think being prepared to understand some of the things around sport rather than the technical, tactical stuff is a really good use of time. So things like Legacy by James Kern on cultures and the stuff that Brené Brown does. Around just working with other humans and cultures and what that looks like, I just think are valuable. And I think with, you know, the likes of social media and Twitter accounts, have a look around, see who's interacting, see who's engaging with people who are maybe respected, or what the NGBs are engaging with, and you know, see where those conversations lead. But again, take those conversations and go and inform yourself, go and dig that little bit further, because they're not always quite as they always appear. But you know, I just think having that going on around you will just help you feel more comfortable in facing some of the challenges that you face.
And then lastly, where can people find out more about you and about working with parents in sport?
Yeah, so we're on www.parentsinsport.co.uk. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with the handle @WWPIS. There's the Parent in Sport podcast. There's loads of content on there, daily basis, lots of conversations happening. You can email me, the email's on the site. Very happy to respond to any inquiries about anything that I can possibly help with if I can. And it'd be great to sort of connect with people.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for what you're doing. And thanks again for your time today. It's been great to chew through some of these issues with you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me. Absolute pleasure.